Okay, welcome everyone to a new episode of Technique Tuesday. This week we're going to be looking at how to perform the front squat with perfect technique. But before we get into the technique itself, let's have a quick look at the main biomechanical differences between the front squat and the back squat first. So with really any squat variation, we're going to be training simultaneous knee extension, where the quads straighten the legs out, and hip extension, where the glutes straighten the hips out. Now, as you can see in this figure from Dr. Brett Contreras' Biomechanics book, you can see that in both variations, the barbell must remain centered over the middle of the foot. So when the bar is positioned to the front of the body, the only way to maintain that balance is to keep a more upright back posture. So notice how the back squat also has the lifter leaning more forward, while the front squat has the lifter more upright. And this is huge because it's actually the main difference between the two. And because of this, you can see that the front squat forces the quads to work a bit harder, but most importantly, it forces the upper back to work much harder to maintain that upright posture. So anyone with any real experience with the front squat will tell you that you'll almost always fail the lift because your traps and rhomboids fail to keep the upper spine extended, not because your quads or glutes give out. And while this may sound like a downside, I think it's actually an upside because it means that the front squat is going to help strengthen the weak points of the back squat, making it, in my opinion, the single best accessory movement for developing raw squat strength. Now, when it comes to muscle activation patterns, one 2015 study from Contreras and colleagues found that the front squat presents a similar training stimulus to the back squat despite requiring lighter loads. So a big advantage of the front squat is that you can get the same basic hypertrophic stimulus as the back squat while using lighter weights, which might reduce injury risk over time. So I'd recommend loading the front squat in a low to moderate rep zone, something around 6 to 8 reps. If you load more heavily than this, it'll be tough to maintain good form as your upper back becomes a limiting factor. And if you do higher reps with lighter weight, it'll probably tax your respiratory system much more than your muscular system, which isn't the goal. Now, there are 3 different grips or rack positions that you can use for the front squat. My number one most recommended option is the Olympic grip. And here you want to rest the bar just behind the shoulders so that the bar actually makes contact with the front of your neck. Now, this will probably feel uncomfortable at first, but if you feel like you're being slightly choked, the bar is actually probably in the right position. Now, rather than holding the bar in the palm of your hands, most lifters let the bar rest in the first 2 or 3 fingers only, with the hands being just outside the shoulders. Now, from here, you want to drive your elbows up until your humerus, or upper arm, is parallel to the floor. So from the front, your elbows should be pointing straight ahead. And this is going to be your starting rack position for the Olympic grip. Now, not everyone is going to have the shoulder or wrist mobility to get into the right position with the Olympic grip. So there are 2 other options. The first is the strap technique, where you loop a pair of straps around the bar and then grip the tail end of each strap, allowing your elbows to stay up even if your mobility is more limited. Still, I see this as more of a short-term solution, and if you're unable to get into that starting rack position comfortably, you may want to work on your wrist and shoulder mobility so you can perform the lift without the use of lifting aids eventually. Now, another common alternative is the cross grip, where you place the bar in the same position up against the neck with the arms positioned out in front of you, and then you just cross the arms over on top of the bar. And this can work fine, however, the bar tends to be less balanced and stable, and it can be much more difficult to keep your elbows up as you fatigue, which might cause you to lean too far forward. But still, as long as you're not approaching failure, I do think this is a technique that has worked for many lifters. But since I think the Olympic grip is the best, this is the one I'm going to be using to demonstrate here. Now, personally, to help get my elbows into that elevated position, I'll really crank my elbows up and forward, really exaggerating that cue during my setup as my upper arms come into that ground parallel position. From here, you want to unrack the bar by driving your hips forward, mindfully keeping the elbows up. Take 3 steps back and plant your feet with about a 15 to 30 degree foot flare. And you should squat with a stance that feels comfortable to you, but in general, just make sure that your feet are at least wider than shoulder width, but not so wide that it prevents you from hitting appropriate depth or causes your hips to shoot back. Take a deep breath into your diaphragm, which you'll hold on the way down. And before initiating the descent, push slightly up on the bar while extending your upper back by thinking about driving your chest up, and then initiate the descent by thinking about sitting straight down, not back. This means you should be breaking at the knees and the hips at the same time, or you can allow the knees to break slightly first, since sitting back in the front squat is going to force the elbows to drop, throwing your balance off. You should be pushing your knees forward and slightly out in the same direction as your toes, and when viewed from the side, there'll be slightly more forward knee travel in the front squat than the back squat, which is totally fine. I've covered the idea that the knees should never go past the toes and why that's actually a myth in another video, and I'll link that down below. Now, the front squat should allow you to reach depth more easily than the back squat, so when front squatting, I don't think there's really any excuse not to break parallel, or at the very least get to parallel at the bottom. And once you hit depth without pausing, you want to take advantage of the stretch reflex in the bottom of the hole, immediately reversing the movement by pressing your big toe, pinky toe, and heel into the ground evenly, while simultaneously driving the bar up, leading with your chest and elbows on the way up. And similar to the back squat, it's important that you still drive your hips forward on the positive, and if you hit a sticking point on the way up, you want to think about forcing your hips forward as if trying to get them underneath the bar, while simultaneously driving the knees out. But you don't want to exaggerate this to the point that the knees actually go out beyond the direction of the toes. Once you get back to the top, make sure you've maintained that proper upright rack position with the elbows high, and brace by taking another deep breath. Drop down between your legs, pushing the knees forward and out, and then explode out of the hole, leading with the chest on the way up. Now, I would say the most common error that I see on the front squat is allowing the elbows to drop down. Now, when you're new to the front squat, this elbow drop will feel almost like the natural thing to do, especially as you fatigue, but this is a technique mistake. So you want to make sure that your elbows are up before you unrack. As you fatigue, you want to maintain a forward or slightly upward eye gaze, and then make an extra effort to keep them elbows up as you descend, which is when they'll be most likely to drop. Now, another very common error is having the heels lift up, and this can stem from a number of issues, such as not having the chest or elbows up, causing the center of gravity to shift forward, but it can also come from poor ankle mobility. So if you have trouble hitting depth, you might want to consider doing some light foam rolling and dynamic stretching for your calves and ankles before squatting, and then do some static stretching for your calves after training. You can also try flaring your feet slightly out more, especially if you have them pointing more straight ahead. And a heeled lifting shoe can also be a big help, since it automatically reduces the plantar flexion range of motion for the ankle. But you also want to remember that just because your heels may be tempted to rise, you don't want to necessarily think about having your weight on your heels, as this might then cause you to sit back rather than straight down. So ideally, you want to have even contact with the ground, triangulated across all 3 pressure points on the foot. Now, if you're not able to front squat, I'd probably recommend some kind of machine hack squat as a replacement for hypertrophy purposes, as the more upright back position is going to make it more of a quad dominant lift. However, it just won't have that same degree of carryover to the raw back squat, since the upper back won't be trained to nearly the same degree. So it'll work for smashing the quads, but can't quite replace the front squat as an assistance strength movement. Now, goblet squats are another good replacement, but they may need to be trained with higher reps at a certain level of advancement, since you're going to be limited by the weight of the dumbbells available. So guys, that is all that I have for the front squat for now. I'd like to point you guys in the direction of my back squat Technique Tuesday video if you guys haven't seen it yet. And I always get asked questions about my training gear like belts and straps, so you can check out the description box below for my recommendations and some discounts there. And you can also find front squats in my 16-week push-pull legs hypertrophy program if you're looking for a routine to make all of this more actionable. So I'll put a button to that program over here next to my head, and I'll also have it linked in the description. Now, don't forget to hit the like button if you guys enjoyed the video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already so you don't miss future Technique Tuesday episodes, and I'll see you guys all here next Tuesday. Bye-bam.